We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding Suspendables, Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, and welcome to it. It's going to be a very special AmRad pod, a very suspendable AmRad pod today, because today Garrett and I are going to be joined by fellow Suspendable George Hill to talk about what it is to actually work in the intelligence community. I mean, Garrett and I were technically members, but George brings a wealth of knowledge in that regard. And really the genesis for this idea for this show is that, one, George is awesome, and we're going to talk to him about some of the things that are going on. But I also wanted to get his perspective on where the value of intelligence is in both the military context and in the national security context and the federal law enforcement context, and where it's really applicable. I had the opportunity through a friend of Tracy Bean's to talk to a young lady who aspires to get into that space, and I couldn't really advise her. And then I started to think, really, how do you get into it? And I think it'll be all benefit from finding out what it actually is that intelligence analysts do day to day. It's not just what you see on the Jack Ryan TV shows and movies and books. It does actually have a value. So we're going to get to all of that today. And a brief aside, let's thank the underwriting sponsor of today's show, guys. And that's going to be the M-Clip Company. M-Clip.com is where you go. M-Clip.com is where you go. Encourage everyone to check them out. It's an American company. These are luxury money clips. It's a family-owned business, been in business actually now for a couple of decades in the state of Georgia, and they have an affiliation with Major League Baseball. They are in some high-end catalogs and other spaces there. So these are actually really nice, and they will not break the bank, which is fun because it's a money clip. So you will still have some money to put into the money clip. You get your initials monogrammed on there, favorite baseball team, or as always, you can go and get the Suspendables, the Suspendable emblem and our logo. All of it's available, and you can use promo code Suspendable to get 10% off of everything store-wide at m-clip.com. Promo code is Suspendable. So without further ado, let's bring on Garrett and let's bring on George, and let's get down to business and talking about what it is to work in the intelligence space. George, you're looking really festive today. And as an aside, I think we should say, guys, we had to pre-record this because of scheduling conflicts. So if the world ended on Tuesday or Wednesday, it's our bad. We didn't get to it. But how you doing today? George is wearing his St. Patrick's Day, so nobody can get pinched. And as is Garrett, I guess I'm the only one who's offended.
Good morning, Steve. I'm kind of irritated today, though.
Is that any different than any other day, George?
No, I went to go get blood yesterday, right? And I get a million questions like, why is it in a bucket? Whose blood is this? Where did you get it? And you try to do something nice for some people, and that's the kind of treatment you get.
It's just it's just there's no gratefulness. There's no gratuity.
Well, I left when they said they were calling the police. So.
I'm out of here. Get your own blood.
So George, I mean, we've been actually able to grow a little bit here in the last few months. I think we're coming closer and closer to that 5,000 followers, and we're growing on the audio format. And guys, if you haven't already, make sure that you do smash the thumbs up, give us a follow, subscribe to the audio format. So for
hey, if you like the show, everybody, if you have subscribed and like the show, share with one person, and we'll be to 10,000 before we know it.
Double it. That's how it works. Math is not racist. George, 30,000 foot view, your experience, and why are you who you are, and keep it family friendly.
Experience. So you like a brief recap of the resume? Is that what you're looking
Send
for?
It. Yes, sir.
Okay. So went straight into the Marine Corps out of high school, did 13 fun-filled and exciting years there in the intelligence sphere. Although I did spend 3 years on recruiting duty, which quite frankly was a truly remarkable experience. And I'm glad I went through it, although I didn't realize it at the time. Personal circumstances intervened. I had to get out. And I was out for almost 10 years when a fellow scout master of mine convinced me into going back into the reserves. I went into the Navy Reserve in January of 2000 when the world was, quote, at peace. And everybody the Marine Corps gave me the Heisman, and the Navy opened the door for me, but I had to go through their intelligence training program. And it was a year's worth of school. And then I got to my first unit, and shortly thereafter, 9/11 happened. Got mobilized 3 times. My last mobilization was to Guantanamo Bay, where I did strategic interrogations uh, as the Saudi Arabian team chief. I spent all of 2004 down there. And actually, Pete Hegseth and I would have crossed paths had we known one another in 2004. Was recruited by the National Security Agency in 2005. Joined them on June 6th, easy day to remember, in 2005 to do find, fix, finish operations for them in the counterterrorism sphere. And in 2010, left them and joined the FBI, where I became the National Security Intelligence Supervisor, where I have responsibility of the counterintelligence, cyber, and counterterrorism programs. And in my spare time for 2 years, I was also the co-supervisor for the Boston Marathon bombing task force. And I managed to squeeze 2 years in there, almost 2 years, working drugs and gangs at the high intensity drug trafficking area, which was a whole new experience for me. And again, a great learning experience. Wouldn't trade it for the world.
When you entered into the military service, I mean, did you have an ambition to get into the intelligence space? Was it something that you had an aptitude for that was identified by somebody else? How did that actually get you on that path?
Sure. So the Marine Corps doesn't guarantee MOSs, military occupational specialty. The Army can be very specific on that, as can the Air Force and the Navy. But the Army is probably the best in terms of really narrowing it down where you're going to go. And, I took the ASVAB just like everybody else does going in, and did well, despite not having done well in high school. uh, so, and I wanted to, carry a rifle and blow things up and have fun, but I just didn't see myself doing that all day every day, because they spent a lot of time doing other silly things like raking dirt and painting rocks. And I was able to do both by joining an infantry battalion as an intelligence specialist, for lack of a better phrase, and did that. And it was great. I mean, traveled around the Philippine Islands, Central America. I have one incident was on a med cruise where I had to courier some top secret information with an Italian local, and he insisted on stopping at this bar that was not a scheduled stop. And I think I was like 18 or 19 years old. I was scared blankless, and so I kind of like backed into it that way. The recruiter thought it was a good slot for me, and that's where I wound up going. And then the Navy, I got to actually choose it, because they asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I like to do intelligence. I did that while I was in the Marine Corps. And they said, well, you're going to have to go to school for that. And I said, well, I did that already. And they said, well, our school is different. And it was. And it's much more broad based and not as operationally specific as the Marine Corps is.
Now, having seen both sides of it in the military context and in the civilian context, the processes very similar, and maybe or are they completely different? How was that transition for you once you went to the NSA?
It's very different. Since 9/11, there have been tens of thousands of experienced intelligence professionals that have knocked on the door to get into one of the intelligence entities within the United States intelligence community. So what we're talking about here, the big ones: National Security Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, NGO, or NGIC, National Ground Intelligence Center, and NRO, the people who operate the satellites. Everybody else is a consumer of intelligence. So when the FBI pounds its chest and say they're a member of the intelligence community, they are not. They're a member, but they're a consumer of intelligence. The ones I named are the only ones that produce and collect intelligence. And I applied to every one of them after my last mobilization, because the country was very different in 2004, and got the Heisman from all of them. And I got a phone call from the National Security Agency, and I said, well, I didn't apply to the NSA. And I said, well, how did you get my name? And the reply was, well, we can't tell you until you come in because it's classified. So obviously I'm not going to share it here. But it's very squirrely, and I've had people work for me at the HIDA with TS clearances, top secret clearance, try to get in. And like I said, it's a long line of seasoned professionals ahead of people. So, unless you can get someone to pay for that clearance ahead of time, you're at the end back end of a long line. And even if you have a clearance, you're still at the back end of a long line unless you know someone who can hold the door open for you and let you in. Or in my case, do really great work for the military and have it be noted by someone in a position that can say, hey, let's bring this person in and have a talk with them. But it is very selective. One of the easiest ways to gain entry is to master a foreign language in demand. So Cantonese, Mandarin, Russian, those types of languages will get you further up the line than without it.
What about the various buckets of actual intelligence collection? I mean, we hear things like SIGINT and OSINT and HUMINT, and unless you speak fluently, or as long as you're on the topic of language, fluent government acronym, can you sort of like give the 101 description of the broadest strokes of what sorts of intelligence come in and how they are aggregated?
Sure, I just, kind of outlined that, but without naming those particular ints. So when we're talking about the NSA, we're talking about SIGINT, signals intelligence, and that's anything. That can be what's called MASINT, measures and signals analysis. So machines emit, certain electronic signals. That's all collected by the National Security Agency and interpreted by a different type of intelligence analyst within the NSA. Then there's your signals collection. So anything that is communications that involves machinery, but humans using that mechanisms to communicate with one another, whether that be email, text messages, voices, radio traffic, all those kinds of things. Just a brief aside on the NSA. Now that may change, but there are actually men and women who spend their entire careers with a set of these on their head, listening to a voice. So when I'm doing find, fix, and finish operations, and we're going to remove a terrorist from the battlefield, it's actually a human being that has listened to this person for, in some cases, for years and knows their idioms and idiosyncrasies and the way they may heighten certain syllables on certain words. They have an intimate knowledge of that person's language. They know exactly how they speak. So you have those people are linguists. All of that then is fed into, intelligence analysts, where they write products on it. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the NSA. Continuing on, National Reconnaissance Office with the satellites and NGA, National Geospatial Analysis. Those folks are the picture takers, but there's a lot more to it than that. They do it's called mensuration, where they measure things which are important. So if you want to determine like the height of a radio tower or the length of a ship or things of that nature, there's a science to that. And I had an opportunity to work with some of those picture takers when I was with the NSA, and I gotta tell you, I was pretty impressed. They're really wicked smart people, and so that's the picture takers. So when you get into the DIA or the CIA, the DIA collects a lot of intelligence on the type of equipment because they're there for the Defense Department, but they also do a lot of human intelligence collection. And these are not spies. The CIA are not spies. They're case officers. They manage assets who go out and collect the intelligence. They recruit assets to go out and collect the intelligence. And that all of that information is synthesized back into what the military would call the tail, where that is fused with other types of intelligence. And I'm giving a white bread overview here. If I were teaching a class at one of the at Naval Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center, this would take an entire day. But that information is fused with what you said just earlier, OSINT, open source intelligence, to formulate a picture of what's going on. Say, for example, if the CIA was doing their job, they would have been able to take in those different types of intelligence prior to the collapse of the Berlin Wall, to include financial intelligence, and make a determination, and then go to the National Security Council and say, hey, we don't think that the Soviet Union is much longer for this world. So it is an art, it is a science. And if I had to distill it down into just one sentence, it's the analysis of trends and patterns.
Now, when you take that raw information, however it is actually gained, and you produce an intelligence product, what I always hear, and you're going to have to give me some clarification on this, that the intelligence community assesses with a moderate level of confidence or a high level of confidence. How do you come to that understanding of I'm very confident, I'm medium confident, specifically because like you're kind of the one processing the information? I mean, aren't you? It's basically like the kid takes a test in school and then grades his own paper, right?
This is where it gets to be an art form and a science combined. So when they say high, low, medium levels of confidence, they're not doing this. Those intervals of low, medium, and high are determined by the amount of intelligence gaps that you have. And the lower the number of gaps that you have, then the higher the level of confidence is, or the confidence is that you are in your assessment. So if you are researching something, it doesn't matter what for the purposes of this discussion, and you have to make a report to someone, it might be better to try to provide an example. I'm going to assess with medium confidence that the new generation drug cartel in Mexico is working with Chinese intelligence. Okay, that's just a premise. So now I need to start supporting that. So now I'm going to go out and look for any kind of signals collection that may raise that level of confidence. If I can find any kind of imagery that would raise that level of confidence, such as maybe members of the cartel interacting with representatives of the People's Republic of China. And then I'm going to look for any kind of proximity analysis. So I might use SIGINT and imagery to co-locate individuals or transportation means, whether they be ships or vehicles, co-located. That raises my level of confidence. And then I want to try to get a human source into there, and they can say, yes, Juan Valdez is absolutely working with Elvis Chan of the People's Republic of China Intelligence Services to
Nice.
fentanyl into the United States. So that's how you raise and lower your level of confidence. Is that clear? I mean, I want to make this.
So you're saying it's not necessarily as subjective as I'm reading it. Whenever I hear
It should not be subjective at all.
It's an
There
objective
should be
descriptor.
No. So when I used to teach college for 12 years at Endicott, their graduate level course, and I would tell my students that if you write or you say to someone that you believe that the new generation is working with Chinese intelligence, well, believing requires the suspension of critical thinking. And it's really the realm of theologians. So I really don't care what you believe. If you say that I feel, well, that's great, but your feelings are no more valid than mine, and vice versa. So I don't really care what your feelings are on the matter. And if you say, I think that, well, okay, that's a step in the right direction. Now you need to start supporting it with signals intelligence reveals that, imagery reveals that. And now you're moved away from thinking into assessing, and now you can actually gradiate it with multiple levels of confidence.
This is the problem with language, because confidence to me is a very a word that we use that is a source of subjectivity. There needs to be something different, because when my entire life, and I worked in the intelligence community, and I heard high degree of confidence, I'm like, well, these guys are just kind of like strutting around, aren't they? They feel really good about it. So it's basically an indicator that you've been able to fill a adequate amount of gaps. And that's basically an objective reading. Is a rubric that you went down and said, we have X amount of gaps, therefore it's medium. We have Y amount of gaps, therefore it's high. It's not basically just feeling your oats. which
It's
to,
no
it's
different
a
than a court of
misnomer.
law. It's no different than a court of law. The preponderance of evidence indicates that what? And it is that evidence readily recognizable by the members of the jury, that they understand what has been presented during the course of that trial. It's no different with an intelligence product. And yes, the Three Stooges used to joke about it all the time. You're murdering the King's English. Well, that's what we do in this country. We murder the King's English. We don't speak clearly. I had a woman at the gym accost me a couple months ago saying that, because I had a jacket on that said the NRA is a terrorist organization. And I said, well, the terrorism has all sorts of legal criteria. Could you just name me one that the National Rifle Association has violated that would make them a terrorist organization? So people use these terms as pejoratives, hyperbolically, and they degrade the actual meaning of the word. And it's hard to hold a conversation with people.
That's one thing I always had an issue with. My biggest exposure to the intel side of things came when I was in the FBI. Sure, we would get intel and whatnot when I was just a ground pounder in the Army, but I would just listen to what the PL told us and why we're doing whatever mission we're doing, and didn't pay much attention to the level of confidence or whatever. For instance, I just pulled up this Vanity Fair piece. I'll pop it up on the screen here, and it's talking about COVID and the FBI's assessment of the Wuhan lab incident leaking from there. And it says right here, the FBI's quote moderate confidence end quote assessment that a lab origin is more likely is especially notable. So when I was in the FBI and I'd see these the way they phrase these things, like moderate confidence, I was always like, what the hell does that even mean? So then I would have to go look and find the definition of what the FBI even meant with their various levels of confidence. Can you talk about, if you remember, because I don't know them all off the top of my head. So moderate confidence to me sounds like, yeah, it's more likely than not, but I don't really know without a better explanation or definition of what that means.
Yeah, you're at about the 50-50 split here. So I have enough supporting intelligence to say that I am moderately confident that this virus came from the Wuhan laboratory. And this is where some of the issues occur, because we're talking about Wuhan. So we'll just stick with that. The FBI, I've read the product, was highly confident that it came from the Wuhan laboratory, but the politics of it caused them to drop that assessment down. So when I saw that product that the FBI wrote about the Wuhan lab and saw almost 2.5 pages of supporting intelligence, you cannot assess anything else other than it is a high level of confidence. But then politics intervened. So we're talking about the Wuhan lab, but hopefully that answers your question, Garrett. I'm sorry. It's just a point of irritation with me that what happened with that,
Right,
because it
right.
was one of the best products I ever read.
Yeah. So in a case like that, because it it is one that was certainly with more notable in the public sphere, I mean, world globally it was. Who or how is the FBI coming to that determination? Because it seems clear now. We've had Steve and I talked about this last week. Germany came out and said, yeah, we had information that we suppressed that it came from the lab. Then a few days later, the United Kingdom came out and said, yeah, we had that information too. Back in January, CIA, same thing. A couple years ago, Christopher Wray revealed, quote unquote, revealed to Brett Baer this moderate confidence assessment. Right around the same time, the DOE came out and said that they believe that also came from a lab. But everybody has different verbiage, different language, but I guess just FBI specific. When it's getting up to that high of a level, if you've got analysts who've been working on this and say, we're pretty sure, like our confidence is good here, but then it gets, to me, it sounds like it got degraded to this moderate confidence level to try to soften the blow because of racism or something.
Well, they did that intentionally, right? Because at first they said, well, we don't know. It could have came from a wet lab. It could have been, you know, from a pangolin or some other baloney like that. So they're slowly walking from no confidence, low confidence to medium level of confidence. At some point, maybe before we die, we'll get to a high level of confidence. But let me give you another example. When I worked at the NSA, there was a gentleman sitting next to me, really great guy, former Navy intel officer, just the nicest, one of the smartest, easiest going people you'd ever want to meet. And he was on the team that did the NSA's assessment as to whether or not Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And at that time, Dick Cheney had already set up unlawfully an intelligence center within the White House, within the executive branch. Uh, and when the NSA submitted their assessment, Cheney's group came back, basically speaking for the White House, and said, yeah, we don't agree with your assessment that there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Take another look at it. And mind you now, this is just a SIGINT assessment. This is not a fusion assessment. This is just a signals analysis. This gentleman and his team came back and said, nope, we are highly confident that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction. And the White House came back and said, you might need to take another look at it. And they all dug their heels in and said, no weapons of mass destruction. And the White House came back and said, get somebody else to write it. Not the answer we want. So politics does intervene in these kinds of things.
Now, also back to the context of like an FBI having this intelligence component. My experience really was limited to what they call RFC, request for collection, where I would be tasked with getting intelligence or going to talk to a human source so that I could answer these questions that an intelligence analyst had, because the intelligence analyst was writing their term paper, right? Was writing their intelligence product. How does the intelligence analyst decide what to write? And essentially, when they do, that kind of drives the mission forward. And that seems like those people have a lot of power. Is that something that's dictated to them from really high up, or is there a lot of latitude as it pertains to, in the FBI or even maybe in the NSA?
There are no written, documented, trying to think of the right term, EEIs, essential elements of information, or collection requirements articulated to support the NIPIF, the National Intelligence Priority Framework, that gets handed down throughout the intelligence community. Like I said, the FBI is not a producer of intelligence that is consumed by the rest of the IC. So if they are doing intelligence collection based on intelligence gaps that may exist, first off, in most cases, they're not for a case. There's no predication here. They're just trying to fill in gaps. So this is an intelligence cycle that has been launched for the sole purpose of either writing term papers or to help create a narrative that white supremacists are rampant throughout the country. So the intelligence, the gaps that you are asked to collect on from a human standpoint are not really supported by what the intelligence community recognizes as the National Intelligence Priority Framework.
And that sort of checks for me, because I was tasked with a request for collection to go and ask a confidential human source, a snitch, some questions pertaining to drugs on an Indian reservation. The problem that I identified was that this informant did not engage with that community. It didn't have any drug knowledge, and I responded back to the intelligence analyst, hey, I can't really fill your collection because my source doesn't have that information. And they basically wouldn't come off. They said, still, you need to go and ask these questions. So they were basically just giving me busy work so that they could give themselves more busy work to write a term paper, right?
Yeah, self-licking ice cream cone, right?
Success.
So
Success.
it's sad but true. This is where we are, Steve. I mean, Director Patel did away with the intelligence branch last week, and they're going back to the future. So we'll have to see what happens. If we are going to send agents out to interview sources, ideally it should be for a case that has been opened on some sort of predicated event.
Right. When I think of law enforcement and then the intel component at a place like the FBI, I always thought, even heading into my time at Quantico and then out into the field, I always thought that would have been how it worked. And then I learned that wasn't the case, that you've got analysts all across the field and at headquarters, working on their quota of Intel products just to get information, just to gather it, just to store it, just to write about it, just to get it out there. And that's a slippery slope for me, especially with a country that we live in that is allegedly free, that our guiding document allegedly wants to keep us that way. To me, that's a very dangerous slope to start sliding down. And I think it is dangerous for all sorts of constitutional reasons. But from this change that was made, because when it was like this previously, I mean, I was a teenager, yeah, maybe 18, 19, because wasn't it around 2005 when it was like that in the past?
When what is like what?
When but before the Intel branch kind of became its own
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, 2005. I'm trying to think when the change occurred. So they brought in McKinsey and Company, and that's when they started integrated program management. So that was probably closer to 2009
Okay.
when that happened. But up until that time, the FBI was trying to emulate the help me out here, Steve or Garrett, the crime stat program that New York City,
Comstat.
Comstat.
Ah.
They were trying to emulate that, and it was called SAPR, Statistical Analysis Program Review, and it was all case driven. And really, the only thing the intelligence branch did up until that time was produce what are called domain products. So they would use a lot of open source stuff to make a determination of what maybe. And again, I'm just using plain street language, for the audience here. Just what's going on in the neighborhood, what's going on in this town, what's going on in this city, back to patterns and trends. What are we seeing that's happening? And that domain product was very large, but there was no intrusive investigative techniques used in that. It was primarily derived from police reporting, which could be found anywhere on the internet, and open source reporting, and to some degree some case reporting, but there was never anything initiated by the intelligence branch to bring that product into fruition. And then the analyst would be focused on working cases and then pushing the boundaries of those cases out to see what other Confederates or other individuals may be involved that are participating that we were unaware of. So when the bomb went off on Boylston Street in 2016, not 2016, but yeah, dating myself, 2014, the one of the things that the intelligence branch did, aside from supporting the manhunt and the subsequent court cases, was to push those boundaries out. I was the co-supervisor and that's what I wanted them to do, to see what did we miss. Was there really a Chechen expat community that posed a threat to the region? It was those kinds of things. It was not constitutionally intrusive or privacy intrusive. And it was constitutionally compliant. But it's this classic slippery slope, and here we are.
Yeah, I think that you're sort of in the intelligence community space, like you are like the punching bag whenever something bad happens. It was always an intelligence failure, right? And the solution, ergo, is that if we could only get more capabilities, instead of accepting that there is an element of inherent risk when you live in an allegedly free society,
If we
people
only
just
could be North Korea,
it would be so much better. All right, can we let's pivot, because I got a couple of stories that I was able to aggregate for you specifically, George, because I think you got a good perspective on them and also got some cool war stories. So I want to go to Gitmo, but you referenced the fact that you were doing interrogations down there. So you were part of what the ACL describes as being part of a remote abusive prison and a site of grave human rights abuses.
How dare you, George?
So the story I actually got, Russ, was about the Trump administration sending some Tren de Aragua people who are already deported. They've exhausted all sorts of court avenues to remain in the country, and they're putting them down in Gitmo. But I wanted it to be a launch off point for you, George, because of your experience down there, and really, what was that like, sitting across the table from some of the worst humans that have ever existed on planet Earth.
How they got there was initial battlefield screening. Then they moved further up the analytical and evaluation in Afghanistan to make a determination whether they would, stay in country or they would go to Guantanamo Bay for further intelligence exploitation. So I didn't get there until I think January, February of '04. So it was a little bit further down the line, 2 years into the GWAT at that time. And they had already moved out of Camp X-Ray into Camp Delta, which were not predominantly, they were exclusively open squad based sort of affairs where you had, diamond plate floors and wire mesh walls, cages really, where they were housed in. Each detainee had their own individual cell, their own individual squatty potty, and they were predominantly just open. In severe inclement weather, they could be closed up. But once you got out of the sun in Gitmo, even in the summertime, it was pretty comfortable. It's an arid environment. They have big fans going on at each end. But let's not sugarcoat this. Human beings are not made to be incarcerated. That's ugly. I get it. But every single one of those people down there, under the Geneva Convention of 1949 and the laws of land warfare, are unlawful combatants. So that they were allowed to live, they should be thankful. I'm sorry they were incarcerated, but under international law, we had the right to execute them on the spot. So we did what's predominantly referred to as strategic long-term interrogations. Right now, we have the benefit of 2020 hindsight, and we didn't understand squat about what was going on. There was a few people like Michael Schur and a few other people that kind of got shunted aside in favor of let's go into Iraq and get weapons of mass destruction. But we didn't really understand the global jihad movement. We didn't understand how information was spread. The internet at that time was still nascent. Smartphones did not exist. How did people communicate? How did people learn of this? How did they move? In my case, all my detainees were from Saudi Arabia. How did they move from Saudi Arabia into Afghanistan? How did they even learn of this? So there were a million questions. And these are the kinds of collection elements that we were supposed to be collecting on that an intelligence community comes up with. And these are people that sit on the National Security Council, working with other members of the intelligence community that make those kinds of determinations of what do we need to know so that the commander in chief, the president, can make better informed policy decisions. So the guys who actually developed the enhanced EITs, enhanced interrogation techniques, actually came and observed the Saudi team for a couple of weeks on how we did long-term strategic interrogations. So we learned a lot. I learned a lot personally. I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. It was, and unlike other previous deployments, nobody was shooting at me. So that was a really big plus.
So you were getting requests for collection from the National Security Council?
Not directly, but there's a process where it flows down. Yes.
Okay. All right. So outside of the Gitmo context, let's take it up to the current goings on and happenings here. And I've talked to you, in other context, George, about the Houthis and Yemen, and it seems like we're going to be dropping some more heads on foreheads there. So I got this one over the weekend from HeadlineUSA.com. The U.S. attacks Yemen as Trump vows overwhelming lethal force. And at the time of this writing, 24 confirmed kills here. I was working my way through this article here. Can you just explain to people who have no context, who are the Houthis and why are we now going back and dropping bombs in the Middle East?
It's the laser light on the floor that the cat is chasing. The Houthis are an Iranian-supported insurgency. I'm really hesitant to slap that terrorism label on people that aren't operating outside their country. In some aspect, yeah, I guess they are a terrorist group now that I think about it, because they have attacked shipping outside of Yemeni territorial waters. But they're an Iranian group that are fighting against Saudi-backed groups in Yemen. And it's a big dog and pony show. It's a big light show that's being put on by the Trump administration, when all they had to do was launch a $900,000 torpedo or send a UDT team, also known as SEALs, and sink that Iranian ship that's been sitting out there for over a year, providing targeting and telemetry to the Houthis so that they can actually target ships in the Mediterranean. So they're not doing line of sight targeting. They're using very sophisticated electronic guidance systems to launch those missiles. So instead, we're spending millions of dollars to kill 24 people when we could just spend a couple 100,000 and send it to the bottom of the ocean. Problem solved. Follow me for more simple solutions to defense and security issues.
And these guys are interrupting shipping lanes, and it's all just essentially a proxy war, right, between us and Iran.
Absolutely, it's a proxy war between us and Iran, using the Saudis' proxy to fight it for us. The United States Navy is supposed to maintain the free use of the international shipping lanes, and they have abdicated that responsibility in the region. It's disgraceful. Any person who's ever donned the uniform of the United States, you don't have to be a sailor or a Marine to be ashamed of that abandonment of the primary mission. So now you talk about inflation. We're driving up prices by having to ship not just petroleum products, but finished goods, raw materials, all the way around Africa, because we can't use the Suez Canal and the Red Sea and transit the Gulf of Oman in safely because of the Houthis. This is a problem that has went on way too long, and now we're having to put up with a light show when this could be solved very easily.
Do you think that the connection they tried to draw with the Butler assassination attempt of Donald Trump and saying that there was an Iranian influence there is part of the light show, or do you think that there's actually uh, an actual threat there from the Iranians?
I would assess with high confidence that it has nothing to do with the other. This just silly. It really is. I mean, Ruth was on the phone when he was shot on the roof. Who was he talking to? Who were the 5 cell phones that were co-located with Ruth at the gun range, at the school, and in and around the site at Butler, Pennsylvania? Who are those people? What are their connections? You're going to tell me that there was an Iranian connection with the shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania? I've heard some people speculate that there was a Ukrainian connection with that. It's all speculation. Without the data, everybody's either guessing or intentionally pointing our attention in another direction for whatever reason. I don't know.
I think that there was also the connection they tried to make with the terrorist arrest that they had, which they happened to arrest the individual the day before the Butler assassination attempt, which sort of blows up the narrative that the Iranians were involved with that. And that was the guy that was the Pakistani who the FBI facilitated him traveling to the United States, arriving and then going through Texas to New York to then go and meet up with some confidential human sources, probably NYPD undercovers, and plot out a roving assassination attempts of multiple United States politicians and the theft of sensitive information, which they had just laying around their houses, infiltrating using fake protests, stealing that information for the low price of $5,000.
There's no shortage of gas for the gaslighting, is there? We get gaslit from both Democrats and Republicans. It's disgraceful. It's like I feel like Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men being yelled at by Jack Nicholson that our politicians are telling us that we can't handle the truth while pounding the table. They have completely undermined our trust in government and its institutions, and it's not a good place for a civil society to be in.
Let's talk about China, because
China.
This one gets me scratching my head because it seems again like we are hurting ourselves in this context. But as always, I'll get your thoughts on it, George. From the Blaze, the Justice Department lawsuit puts U.S. tech at China's mercy. So for background on this, the DOJ hatched a lawsuit more than a year ago under the Biden administration, though it is now being blamed on the Trump administration because it's carried on into the new presidential administration. In question is a $14 billion merger between HP and Juniper, which the companies say would accelerate development of technologies like 6G and AI-driven networking. It would also counter, how do you pronounce this, by the way? Is it Huawei?
Huawei.
Huawei, that's right.
Like Huawei.
Yeah. Which controls 30% of global telecommunications. So basically, these big technological conglomerates want to unify so they can have this capability and counteract the Chinese, but the DOJ is going after them for antitrust purposes. I don't know how familiar you are. I know you're really way more versed on the Chinese threat than either one of us. What's your read? Are we, as a country, essentially like holding ourselves back?
We're shooting ourselves in both feet on this one. It took us a year, us meaning the FBI Boston office, to convince MIT not to sign a contract with Huawei. Like, we could show them where their intellectual property was going. We had to have them sign non-disclosure agreements. We could show them that they're just giving stuff to the Chinese, and their response is, well, it's really a good platform. It's good technology, and it's cost effective, and it's the same short-sightedness on the merger of these two American companies. I get it. I understand. I'm not a big Facebook fan. I understand the reasons for antitrust legislation, but for crying out loud, when it comes to national security, can we not develop some sort of framework or mechanism to at least mitigate the effects of having a super communications company in this country? Because Huawei, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it's used in a lot of our, countries that we consider ourselves friends with. So think of them as a giant collection platform. We need to keep them out, which we're doing an okay job doing, but we also need to displace them in places where they're already operating, and that includes other countries.
What is China's counterintelligence capability like compared to our own here in the United States?
Counterintelligence or intelligence?
Intelligence.
Their intel capacity?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, it's awesome. You had
You have no freedom. So
you had within 9 months, you had the compromise of the OPM giving up everybody's SF-86, everybody with a clearance.
I got LifeLock for a year. So
then,
it was
all at the same time, though, the parent corporation that owns Marriott was compromised. So Marriott, if you don't know, is the hotel of choice for most feds. And then also the Anthem Healthcare was compromised as well, which most federal employees have through Blue Cross Blue Shield. So earlier in the program, we talked about fusion and bringing all that data together. So the Chinese are actually ahead of us in terms of supercomputing capacity. So if you're a Chinese intelligence analyst, unlike the FBI, you're not pouring through and reading through files. They're getting supercomputers to take all those databases. Oh, by the way, they just hacked a major telecom company here a couple of months ago. They're fusing all that together. And if you're a Chinese intelligence officer, you're getting targeting packages, targeting meaning going after individuals that are logarithmically, not quite yet AI generated, but using supercomputers. And you're getting a profile of, I'm going to go after George Hill, and I expect for him to close the following intelligence gaps that we need. So their intelligence capacity is, to call it formidable, is a gross understatement.
And on top of that, you have a tremendous amount of animosity and distrust of our own intelligence collection agencies because of the fact that they were very openly became politicized, which is, we talked about the lab leak theory being downgraded because of political purposes. But I did see that, and it comes from the New York Times, once a newspaper, that the CIA is now favoring the lab leak theory because they have a new CIA director, of course. Now, and George, Garrett and I talked about this last week, trying to get through the benign and innocent reason. All right, so the CIA now favors a lab leak theory to explain COVID's origins. So you have the new CIA director, John Ratcliffe, who is there. Garrett and I talked about it a week ago. The fact that you have no reason that's benign and innocent that they possibly could have withdrawn or not come out with, hey, it came from a lab. Like, why would they tell the American people that this was a conspiracy theory, that other than they wanted to withhold the fact that there was government research going on so that they could then implement their own recommendations for us, and people would be more inclined to accept their recommendations for it rather than just being honest and saying, hey, look, it was our bad. Despite our best efforts, this virus leaked out there, and here's what we know, and maybe we could make recommendations for counteracting it. But in essence, people would have gotten to the bottom of it, I think, and realized that we were funding the research for a vaccine, which they then foisted upon the American people. So, I mean, this was sort of our buildup for it. Now, my question to you, George, is this political, or are they going back to actually assessing the way that you would expect an intelligence agency to come to some sort of conclusion, be it medium, low, high levels of confidence?
They're slow walking it. The CIA lost its human collection quite a few years ago, and I'm not going to go down that path because I'm not confident in my ability to stay unclassified. But it's been written about quite extensively by other people on the internet. But considering my non-disclosure agreements, I'm just not going to go there. It's fair to say the CIA really screwed the pooch on this one and lost its human collection capability on the Chinese. That would be the only thing. That would be the only missing component from a, write the check, cash the check, spend the money, high assessment that the Chinese did all the things that we think that they did.
My fear was that they did not want to call out the Chinese because they didn't want to escalate some sort of tensions with them that could have been kinetic, because they could have blamed them for a global pandemic. But I think that's the most far-fetched, innocent explanation for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're soft pedaling it.
All right.
The administration, I wonder if Pete Hegseth went to the woodshed on when he said that we're ready for a trade war or whatever, and we're ready for a shooting war. I wonder if he went to the woodshed on that one, because Trump likes to talk about how his great relationship with President Xi. President Xi started out as a drug dealer, as a province manager in southeastern China during the Vietnam War, funneling heroin into the GIs fighting in Vietnam. So Xi's not a friend. They're not a friend of me. They're an enemy. And at some point in time, we're probably going to mix it up with them.
That to me is the ultimate. Like, the fact that we're not preparing for that inevitability is the most concerning fact, that we think our efforts are better at turning the tide rather than just preparing for the most likely. I can assess with a high level of confidence, and I'm saying
President
confidence
Xi,
in the context of, I just have a good feeling about it, that it's going to go dark, and it's an asymmetrical battle where, like, they have a plan over there to take us down, and we just keep saying, no, let's be friends.
I wonder, President Xi has said multiple times, if you're just relying on reporting to get your information on what's going on in China, you're short, not you or your audience, but you're shortchanging yourself. President Xi has said on multiple occasions, going back for years, that there can only be one hegemon. We are not going to we meaning China is not going to be part of any kind of multipolar or bipolar world. We are not sharing anything with the United States or any other country. He's been quite clear on that. So, do the math.
All right. Talked about Pete Hegseth. I got one more that's fun because we were laughing about it ahead of time, but I do think it's worth the American Radicals podcast audience. Let's talk about the fact that we called the once chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff corpulent because of the physical fitness standards. George, you're a firm believer, as am I, in the necessity to be ready and fighting shape at all times. I definitely always got that feel from Mark Milley. Like, I couldn't imagine the last time that guy had ever pushed himself away from the table feeling a little bit hungry, or could even have done a sit-up. The fitness standards, it's been pretty well documented, fell off. But I guess we're getting back to actual real physical fitness requirements within the armed forces. You celebrating that, or do you think that there's more work to be done just beyond a policy perspective?
Marines are contemptuous of people who are, and hopefully I don't offend anybody here, but we're contemptuous of fat people and people who can't shoot. And it's a toss up between either one of it. The level of hate is palpable. So that's where I come down on that. When Gunnery Sergeant Hartman calls Private Pyle a disgusting fat body, I can understand that. There's just no excuse for it, and it really falls underneath one of the 7 deadly sins of gluttony. Do you have no control over yourself? Even if you can't get into the gym and work out on a regular basis, can you not push yourself away from the table? Can you not make some healthy dietary choices? It really does speak to a slovenly sort of attitude towards life, and that's not somebody I would want running, being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
There you go. That's a fair assessment right there for those who are listening. That's a nice potbelly soldier, right? Who's carrying 3 pizzas for himself. He's on his lunch break.
What do you think about that guy, George?
What's that?
What do you think about that guy?
You know what? Unless he could drill, a target at 1,500 yards consistently, I'm going to have to do 2 thumbs down on that.
Yeah, I don't think he'd be able to even get into a proper position to make a shot like that unless it was on a flat range. So I'm not going to hold my breath.
Could you imagine him in the prone position? He'd be like a turtle. Like it could, I can't.
Oh man.
Okay. All right. So those are the list of stories I want to get to with George. As always, we thank him for his expertise on it. We're going to wrap it up. Garrett, you got any quick thoughts for us? And I do have a palate cleanse that I want George to see because it's funny.
I do. Heading back to Ephesians 6 again. It's a bottomless well. I don't know how many more of these I'm going to do, but we're going to go there. We're going to saturate your brains because I think it's important. Ephesians 6:10 through 20. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and the shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. And then a short clip here.
That which consists of the true blood-bought body of Jesus Christ. And so if you're taking notes, jot this down. The power to stand firm. The power to stand firm. Look at verse 10. It begins finally. In conclusion. Last but certainly not least. And then a command. Be strong in the Lord. This is calling us to be strong. And this call to be strong is addressed to the entire Ephesian church, and by extension to the universal church, and therefore to us. This is a call to be strong, and it's an imperative. calling on us to ever and always be strong in the present tense. And yet the strength that we're to be strong with is not our own. This command is expressed in the passive voice. And so this is a strength that comes to us as we're acted upon by another. And the source of this strength is who? The Lord Jesus Christ. Since it says that we're to be strong in the Lord. Where in depicts our union with Christ, calling on us to live in such vital union with him that the flow of his strength is unobstructed. And that Christ is the source of this strength is further emphasized in the last half of verse 10 where it says, and in the strength of his might. Some translations say the strength of his power. Others say the power of his might. Still others say the might of his power, but either way, the idea is that we would be strong in the inherent strength of the might of Christ. And the theme of this strength is expressed in multiple times, multiple places throughout this epistle. And so look at chapter 1 for a moment, because
That's probably a good place to wrap, as much as I want to let it keep going, but just the reminder to be strong. Don't be like that disgusting fat body. And I know that's a physical embodiment of it, but to be disciplined, to be strong in the Lord, I think it requires us to be disciplined and be strong in our lives, including physical fitness. Most importantly, though, as it's talked about there in Ephesians 6, a spiritual fitness, because it's a constant cosmic battle with the evil one, as it talks about there.
All right. And for a palate cleanse today, I imagine this is what it's like when you're working on an informant. You're trying to get a source of information, and when you finally crack the code and get them to give you what you want, and then it's just a wealth of information. George, what do you think about this one? George, your thoughts?
I don't understand surfers. I'm a scuba diver. I would have been quite happy with the lagoon just as it was, but apparently they needed to change it.
I don't know, just reshaping the map every single day so they can catch some waves. All right. All right. That'll do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Reminder, if you haven't already, smash the thumbs up, give us a follow, and subscribe to the audio format. As always, guys, hope you had enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.